The lasagna had been in the oven for 40 minutes when my husband looked up from his phone and said, very quietly, "What do you actually know about your brother-in-law's firm?" I was standing at the counter slicing a loaf of sourdough. My sister Deb was in the living room with her husband Colton, showing my mother something on her tablet. I could hear my mother laughing, that light laugh she does when she's trying to seem younger than she is. I set down the bread knife. "What do you mean?" My husband, his name is Frank, and he spent 11 years as a forensic accountant with the FBI before he took the private sector job 2 years ago, didn't look up right away. He just scrolled a little, then set his phone face down on the counter. "Nothing," he said. "Never mind. It's probably nothing." But Frank doesn't say things like that about nothing. In 11 years of federal work, in 2 years since, I have never once heard him use the phrase, "It's probably nothing," to mean it. He says it when something is caught on a corner in his mind and won't let go. I looked through the archway into the living room. Colton was leaning over my mother's shoulder now, pointing at something on the screen, and my sister was smiling with her whole face, the way she only does when she's proud of him. She'd been proud of Colton for 3 years, ever since he started Meridian Capital Group, which was, depending on who was talking, either a boutique investment advisory firm or the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice, which was a phrase I'd heard Colton use more than once at more than one family dinner. Deb had put in $60,000. My mother had put in 40. I knew this because Deb had told me in the way she tells me things she wants me to validate, with her chin slightly lifted and her eyes slightly daring me to say something discouraging. I hadn't said anything's discouraging. Colton had always seemed sharp. He had the right vocabulary, the right handshake, the right way of making a room feel like it was slightly smaller and more exclusive because he was in it. I'd believed in him the way you believe in weather, without examining it because it seemed like a fact. Frank had always been polite. That was all I'd noticed. Just polite. After dinner, after the dishes, after my mother fell asleep in the armchair with the television on low, I followed Frank out to the back porch. It was October, cold enough that I crossed my arms. "Tell me," I said. He leaned on the railing and looked out at the yard for a moment. The oak tree we'd planted the first fall in this house was losing its leaves, and they were dark and flat on the wet grass. "The name of his firm doesn't come up in the FINRA broker database," he said. "And I'm not saying that definitively means anything. There are structures that don't require registration, but the way he described it tonight, the fund structure, the language he used around liquidation timelines, it doesn't match what he said about it at Thanksgiving." The numbers moved, I repeated. The story changed. Small things. The kind of small things most people don't track. I stood there for a minute. Through the glass door I could see the living room, Deb sitting sideways on the couch now, feet tucked under her, scrolling her phone. She was probably texting Colton, who had left an hour ago for what he called a West Coast call he couldn't push. "How bad?" I said. Frank shook his head slowly. Not like he didn't know, like he didn't want to say it out loud yet. "I don't know enough yet. I need to look more carefully." That night I lay in the dark for a long time and listened to the house settle. Frank was asleep, or seemed to be. I wasn't. I was doing what I always do when something is wrong and I can't fix it yet. I was building a version of events that made everything okay. Colton had explained it wrong because he was tired. The database gap was a technicality. Deb would be fine. I was good at that version. I'd been practicing it for 3 years. What I didn't know yet was that I'd run out of room to practice it in. Frank spent the next week looking quietly. He didn't tell me everything he was finding in real time. He's careful that way, doesn't want to alarm before he's certain. But I could tell by the way he came to dinner a little distracted, the way he'd pause mid-sentence sometimes and look at the middle distance, that whatever he was finding was not shrinking the concern. It was growing it. The following Saturday, Deb called to Colton was throwing a small gathering at their place, just a few of the Meridian family, which was what he called the people who had invested. She wanted us to come. She was excited. There was apparently going to be a Q3 update with printed materials and everything. I told her we'd be there. I told Frank about it over coffee. He looked at his mug for a moment, then said, "I want to come." "I just said we'd be there." "No, I mean, I want to pay attention." The party was at Deb's house, which is really Colton's house in that way some houses belong more obviously to one person than to two. It's a big craftsman in the kind of neighborhood where the trees are mature and the driveways are long, and Colton had clearly spent seat money on the landscaping since last time. There were string lights along the fence line, a caterer, Someone handing out glasses of sparkling water with cucumber slices in them. I counted about 15 people. Couples, mostly, some older than my mother. A few of them I recognized from the one Meridian event I'd attended 2 years ago, a dinner where Colton had stood at a whiteboard and explained compounding returns in a way that made everyone feel slightly smarter for understanding it. He was good at that, making you feel smart for believing him. The Q3 materials were on a table near the fireplace, glossy folders, charts in Meridian's colors, which were a deep navy and a kind of burnished gold that managed to feel both safe and aspirational at the same time. I picked one up. Frank picked one up. We read them separately. I noticed as I was reading that the fun performance chart had no y-axis numbers, just a line that went up and to the right, confidently, steadily, reassuringly upward. Later in the car, Frank said, "The performance figures in that report don't match any benchmark period I can verify. The timeline they're citing for their flagship return overlaps with a market correction where those numbers would have been impossible unless they were in something very specific. When I ask what specifically, there's no answer. There's never an answer." I stared at the windshield. "Deb has $60,000 in there," I said. "I know, and Mom has 40. "I know," he said again, quieter. I didn't say anything for the rest of the drive home, not because I didn't have things to say, but because all the things I had to say required me to accept something I hadn't fully accepted yet, and I wasn't ready to do that in a moving car on a Saturday night. I called Deb on a Tuesday morning. She was between meetings. She said, "Could this be quick?" I said yes, and then I said no. "Actually, can we have lunch this week?" She heard something in my voice. I know she did because there was a small pause. The pause she's been giving me since we were kids, when she's deciding whether she wants us to know what I know. "Is everything okay? I just want to talk to you," I said, in person. We met at a diner near her office on Thursday. She ordered a Cobb salad and picked at it. I ordered coffee and didn't touch it. I told her as carefully as I could what Frank had found. The registration gap, the unprovable performance figures, the shifting details. The way Colton had answered questions at the gathering with more questions, or with charm, or with the kind of confident non-answer that sounds like information and isn't. Deb listened. Her face went through several expressions in a way that reminded me of weather changing over a field. You could watch each system moving through. First confusion, then the particular stillness that is not calm but is what she does before she argues, then something that was almost contempt, directed, I understood, not at Colton but at me. "Frank's being paranoid," she said. "Deb, he doesn't like Colton, he never has, and this is," she gestured with her fork in a way that meant all of this, "this is just him finding a professional excuse to be right about something he decided a long time ago. That's not what's happening. He's been out of federal work for 2 years. He doesn't have access to the same resources anymore. He's probably misreading something." I leaned forward a little. "Deb, Mom has $40,000 in this." Something crossed her face at that. It was brief, but it was there. "The fund is fine," she said. "Colton showed me the custodial statements. Did you verify them with the custodian directly?" She put her fork down. "I'm not going to interrogate my husband," she said. I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel and a feeling in my chest like something was calcifying. Like concern was hardening into something heavier. Frank was at the kitchen table when I got home, working on his laptop. He looked up when he saw my face. "She's not there yet," I said. He nodded like he'd expected that. "How long did it take her to get angry?" "About 90 seconds. He almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because he knows how fast Deb's loyalty moves. What happened next, I wasn't ready for. I've gone over it many times since, and I still can't quite account for how fast it moved once it started moving. It was a Thursday night, 5 weeks after the Meridian gathering, when Colton called Frank's cell phone. Not mine, Frank's, which struck me as strange even before I knew what he was calling about. I was in the other room, but I could hear Frank's voice. Low, measured, the voice he uses when he's gathering information without revealing that he's gathering it. When he came in 15 minutes later, his face had a particular quality I'd only seen a few times, usually after calls involving cases that had taken a bad turn. He sat down across from me. "He wants to meet," Frank said, "tomorrow, alone. He said he wants to come clean before this goes any further, which tells me he has some awareness of what I've been looking at." "How would he know you've been looking?" Frank looked at me carefully. "I may have made some calls that had his name in them, to people who know people." I felt something cold move through me. Not at Frank, at the sudden realness of it. While I'd been hoping it would dissolve, Frank had been quietly pulling a thread, and now the thread had pulled back. We met Colton the next afternoon at a coffee shop near downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick and too many options on the menu board. He was already there when we arrived. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping. The easy confidence that usually organized his face was still there, but it was thinner, like a veneer on something hollow. He ordered nothing. We ordered coffee. There was a long moment where the ambient noise of the shop pressed in around us and nobody spoke. "I need to start over," Colton said finally. Frank didn't say anything. I've watched him do this before. He waits, and the waiting itself is a kind of pressure that most people can't tolerate. "Meridian started legitimately," Colton said. "I want you to understand that. The first year was real. The strategy was real. But we hit losses in year 2 that I didn't disclose. I papered over them. I thought I'd make it back up. I thought." He stopped. "I told myself a lot of things." The coffee shop was warm. There was a family at the table near the window, 2 kids and a stroller, and the kids were arguing over a muffin, and the whole thing was so ordinary it felt surreal against what was happening at our table. "The statements Deb has," Frank said. Colton looked at the table. "Not accurate. The performance reports. Not accurate. The total amount currently under management." Colton's jaw moved. "Significantly less than represented." I heard my own voice come out very flat. "My sister has $60,000 in this. I know. My mother has 40. He closed his eyes briefly. "I know that too." I don't remember every word that was said in the next 20 minutes. I remember Frank asking specific questions in his specific way, and Colton answering them with the exhausted compliance of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a long time, and has finally, for whatever reason, decided to put it down. I remember thinking that Colton was not a monster. That made it harder, not easier. It is much simpler when the person who has hurt your family is a monster. When they're a person who made a bad choice and then another bad choice, and then couldn't find the door out of the room those choices made. It is a different kind of hard. At the end, Frank asked the question that I knew he was building toward. "Are you prepared to self-report to the SEC?" Colton looked at his hands on the table. They were very still, which seemed to take effort. "Yes," he said. "And make full restitution, or at least demonstrate a plan toward it." "Yes." "That's not a guarantee of outcome," Frank said. "You understand that. Voluntary disclosure improves your position but doesn't determine it." "I understand." Frank sat back slightly. He looked at me once, briefly, then back at Colton. "Then that's where you start," he said. "Telling Deb was the hardest thing I have ever done in a relationship with another person. I've had hard conversations. I've had the kind of conversations where you say something true and watch it land on someone you love and wish, for just a moment, that you had chosen differently. But those were things I could see coming. This one I had dreaded for weeks, and it still felt, when it happened, like something dropping through ice. She came over on a Sunday. I hadn't told her what it was about, only that it was important and that Frank would be there. She knew the moment she saw our faces. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Frank first said it's probably nothing, and I walked her through all of it. The registration, the performance reports, the conversation with Colton, what he'd admitted, what he was going to do. Deb didn't yell. I expected her to yell. What she did instead was go very quiet, in a way that was worse than yelling, a kind of silence that filled the whole room. Then she started crying. Not the kind of crying that's anger wearing a different coat. The real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere low and doesn't have a speech attached to it. I moved around the table and sat next to her and put my hand on her back, and she cried for a while, and I didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would have been worth saying. After a long time she said, "He knew I trusted him." "Yes," I said. "I told people about this. I told Mom." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I convinced her. I know what happens now." Frank answered that, gently and carefully, the way he does when he's managing something serious. He explained the SEC voluntary disclosure process in plain terms. He explained that they had an attorney he trusted who handled securities matters, and that Colton had agreed to speak with him. He explained that there would be an investigation, and that the timeline was uncertain, but that Colton's cooperation put them in the best possible position. He explained what recovery of funds might look like, and he was honest that it would likely be partial and would take time. Deb listens to all of it. When Frank was done, she sat quietly for another minute, then said, "Is he going to prison?" "I don't know," Frank said. "That depends on a lot of factors outside of anyone's control right now." She nodded very slowly, the nod of someone absorbing information they don't fully want. "Did you know a long time ago?" she asked him. "I had a concern," he said. "I didn't have certainty." I didn't say anything until I had enough to be responsible about saying. She looked at me then. Did you know? I knew when Frank told me, I said. I should have told you sooner than I did. That one's on me, Deb. I kept hoping I was wrong. She was quiet. I kept hoping that too, she said. Colton made the call to the SEC the following Wednesday. Frank sat with him, not as his attorney. He's not an attorney, but as someone who understood the process and wanted to make sure Colton walked through the door he'd agreed to walk through. He told me later that Colton was nervous but steady, that he said what he needed to say without backpedaling. The months that followed were not simple. The investigation moved at the pace those things move, which is slow and indifferent to the urgency of the people involved. Deb and Colton separated, then reconciled, then separated again. My mother took the news about her $40,000 with a kind of practical stoicism that surprised me, though it probably shouldn't have. She's 71 and has seen money come and go and understands better than I do that it is not the same thing as life. The other Meridian investors were notified. Some of them were angry at Colton. Some of them were angry at the system. One couple, older, from the neighborhood, simply seemed tired, and the way people get when something they feared might happen has finally happened and they no longer have to be afraid of it. I thought about that a lot. The strange thing that can happen when the worst thing stops being a possibility and becomes a fact. The way a fact, even a bad one, has an outline you can see and move around. It was the possibility that had kept me up at night. The fact, at least, had edges. By spring, there was a restitution plan in place. Colton had liquidated assets. The Craftsman House, a vacation property in Tennessee I hadn't known about. The return to investors would be partial, maybe 60 or 70 cents on the dollar over time, which is not whole but is more than nothing. And in cases like this, more than nothing is not a small thing. I saw Colton once during all of this at a coffee shop in the early part of the process. He looked diminished in a way that had nothing to do with sleep or clothes. Like something he'd been using to hold himself up had been removed and he hadn't yet found what would replace it. He said, "I'm sorry about your family." I said, "I know." He said, "I thought I could outrun it." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. But I thought about it on the drive home. The way we believe sometimes that speed is the same thing as control. That if you keep moving fast enough in the right direction, the wrong things you did will stay behind you. Frank was on the porch when I got home. The spring evening was cool, and the oak tree had leafed out again since October, and the yard looked completely different from the night he'd first said it's probably nothing. Greener, fuller, the way things look when time has moved through them. I sat next to him. "How are you doing?" he said. I thought about it honestly, the way I've been trying to do more since all of this. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm glad we didn't look away." He put his hand over mine on the armrest. "Deb's going to be all right," he said. It wasn't a promise. It was something more like a direction, the way you point at something in the distance, not because you can see it clearly yet, but because you believe it's there. "Yeah," I said. "I think so." We sat there until it got dark and I kept thinking about the word probably. How Frank had used it once, carefully, in a kitchen months ago, and how much had turned on that one small word and the man who said it and the fact that I had listened. Some people look away. I'm glad we didn't.